The next thing that we have is our speaker. Her name is Anna Duke. She is presenting the life and science behind Arctic shorebird nest monitoring. I can't read my own handwriting. That's really terrible.
It's right behind you.
And please come up here and save me from this horrible, awkward moment. Hi. Hi. So, yeah, if we could turn the lights back off, I think this will be better like that. Hi, thanks for coming, everybody. My name is Anna Von Duyke. And I have spent a handful of summers working in Alaska in the Arctic, doing a lot of shorebird and a bit of eider nest monitoring. So the purpose behind this is kind of just to talk about what it's like to live in the field, both in remote field seasons and also within some oil fields too. So I've spent time camping on the tundra for the entire summer and also living like in oil dorms for the entire summer as well. I'll say there's a ton of pictures. I'll try to do my best at staying concise, but it was so hard to choose, and I'm so excited to look at them again. So if you have a question about any specific picture that I'm maybe on or just past, you can definitely ask. I'd love if you would talk back to me while I'm talking for so long by myself, and then maybe some general questions at the end. So this work I started with Wildlife Conservation Society when I was 19. I got really lucky and they had a grant to hire a youth biologist, they called it. So hiring a young person who didn't have any experience at all and sending them out there so that they could get some. And I wanted to do field work and I thought this is field work. It's 50 days on an island in the Chukchi Sea. Talking to no one I've ever known before, no friends or anything, living with two other people I've never met. I'll go do that. And since then, I've realized that field work is on a wide spectrum. And you can do a lot of different types of field work, but I started kind of on the far end of that spectrum when I was pretty young. So the first 3 seasons were Casagalic Lagoon with Wildlife Conservation Society, Kupaluk Special Nesting Area, Prudhoe Bay oil fields, and then my last summer I was working with ABR, Environmental Research and Services, which is a consulting firm, and they're both based out of Fairbanks. So I'll just get into it. I have a map here from WCS. This is where I started my first season. There's this tiny little point right up there, and I was on a little spit, like a sand island right in the Chukchi Sea, off of the coast of northern Alaska. So all my work has been done in these coastal plains. Hopefully someday I'll visit the treed area of Alaska. I'm trying my best, but it's taken me 4 years and I haven't gone there. So Casagalic Lagoon is season number 1. This is another view of the maps of the area. Really just a skinny little island, maybe 400 meters wide at the widest point, maybe 15 miles long. And forgive me as I talk about eiders for a minute during my shorebird talk, but that's how I got introduced to this bird nest monitoring. So this was a plot set up over many years of time. So long-term nest monitoring, kind of to study how nesting is changing over time, over global climate change, and a lot of the ways that the Arctic is changing pretty rapidly. So these are with common eiders as well. I saw all the species of eiders while I was up there, which is cool. Stellars and spectacled and king, just flying all over the place. It's pretty amazing. This is my crew. That is me on the right, and Nika and Kayla. Something pretty important to me is that my first season I worked just with these 2 women for 50 days straight, only talking to them, and I had a female lead biologist, and it was kind of amazing. It was like best case scenario. We were like best friends. It's like a slumber party every night, braiding each other's greasy hair every day, painting together on the beach, like walking for 5 hours together, just talking. So I think that if I had not had that experience the way I did with them, probably wouldn't have gone back as many times. But it just worked out so good for me. This is kind of when I got the first taste of what crazy stuff I was about to see over the next 4 seasons. This is on a fixed wing from Kotzebue, flying to Icy Cape, Casagalic Lagoon, and this is a giant horde of migrating caribou. So it's hard to tell. I can't even get the whole thing, but the herd goes up here and then off the screen over there, and all these little speckles are caribou migrating through the tundra. Yeah, and you can just tell it's so much space, and there are so many giant and tiny little creatures moving through. This is when we landed. I'm kind of gonna use Casagalic as an intro of mine to fieldwork. My second season is the meat of like the Shorebird, study what the work is. And then my 2 oil field seasons will kind of add some extra species, some new predators. And then I have tons of really pretty pictures along the way as well. Kind of just showing a plethora of what Arctic coastal plains habitat looks like. The Arctic is massive. It all looks really different, but this is a little taste of what at least the coastal plains of Alaska look like. So here's our island, our home. I haven't been back there, but they're continuing to do studies up there at Casagalic Lagoon. My coworker from 2 summers ago just spent the summer up there. We landed on these planes with these big tundra tires. This is a shot of actually the resupply plane coming in. So we already have camp set up, and they're bringing in a bunch of food and actually a pizza for us, which was pretty amazing, and a couple oranges and a photographer named Peter Mather who spent a week with us. And this is one of his photos, and there's some really wonderful shots of his I'm really grateful to have. So we set up our cook tent, that little red tent right there, with the only wind block around, which was an old hunting cabin that kind of got dragged out there somehow, maybe by a dog team, maybe by snowmobile, but it's kind of sunken into the ground, and it kind of protected us a little bit from the Chukchi Sea, which is over here on the left, and the lagoon, which is there on the right. So this is between Point Lay and Wainwright, these 2 villages in northern Alaska. And so there's a lot of subsistence hunting that happens in this area. And we met a couple of those hunters later. Here's another view of our tent, our little shack. There's a bear fence wrapping around it. We cooked within that tent, doesn't have a floor. And you can see kind of right to the cabin, there's our 3 little cute sleep tents way over there. So we were in bear country. We were trained to expect potentially polar bears, potentially grizzly bears. The season previous to us was a different season. They were still iced in when they arrived, and they had one curious polar bear that was visiting their cook tent. So we were trying to expect that, but we were lucky enough to not see any polar bear. Here's a view of our sleep tents. This is kind of the type of light that you see maybe 12, 1 or 2 in the morning. We were there from late May through July. So we arrive a little bit before the nesting season starts, timed obviously by the birds. So we wanted to get there to set up, and it's bright 24 hours in the day. So you're kind of on your own time there, especially when you're fully remote with your crew like that. So we've got our tents there. We added Peter's tent, our photographer, another bear fence around all of us. And this is the highest ground that we could find in the area, and the driest ground. But we didn't realize till maybe a week later when the nesting started that we were right on the edge of a massive Arctic tern colony. Which was really interesting when you get out to pee at night and they said dive bombing your head, or you go walk to the ocean to spit your toothpaste out and they like cut your hands open, but they're just being protective mothers. So this is kind of a layout, a picture of my field journal from the summer. It doesn't look like that many days when I look at it like this, but you can kind of see my little key things that I did every day: nest searching, camera setup, camp chores, searching east of our camp, searching west of our camp, nest checking, boating, waiting for planes, a lot of stuff that we filled our days with. And then a little bit of a species list there. I saw some crazy stuff this first time. I think that's kind of what got me going back there. This area is pretty amazing. Just as far as the mammals go, There was a gray whale mother and her baby like feeding for 2 days in the Chukchi Sea. Huge pods of beluga whale. Of course, the caribou always coming through. The area close by called Icy Cape is really important for walrus to feed and haul out with their young. And so there's these huge hordes of walrus coming through, and you could kind of hear them groaning as they pop out of the water when you're going to sleep at night. And spotted seal and grizzly bear. A lot of these bird species I saw again, obviously in my later seasons, but some things that I didn't ever see again are probably the Steller's eider, the mirror, guillemot, ruddy turnstone. Maybe I saw one more of those. The short-tailed shearwater. That was a pretty amazing moment. I went abroad the year after I did this season. I went to Southern Australia, and I got to see the shearwaters coming back from feeding in the Antarctic. And I kind of realized that I'd been up there and I'd seen where they were nesting, and then I also traveled to the bottom of the world, and it was pretty amazing to think about them flying so far. This is a really wonderful photo of an Arctic tern that Peter Mather took. Kind of makes me forgive them a little for all that they put us through. But they are also ground nesters, as everything is in the tundra. And here's us doing some nest checking, and I'll never forget the sound of the tern hovering above your head and doing its like chittering, and then that's when you know it's about to hit you in the skull or bite you or do something. They also do this. It's another tactic to get you to get away from their nests because their babies are in there. So that's my coworker Kayla, unfortunately. And the later season, I actually had a tern do the same to me, and it landed right in my open breast pocket of my jacket, which good shot on that. And these are the little tern babies. There were hundreds and hundreds of these roaming around the sand. So we were like tiptoeing very carefully, trying to look where we were going, because at this point when they can't fly, they have mainly avian predators. They just stand still, and they've evolved to look like hunks of moss. So I was always really afraid of stomping on a tern, but I avoided it. Here's kind of what it looked like walking up and down the beach every single day. We had some technical difficulties with our boat. We were supposed to have a Zodiac to go all the way up the island and look for eider nests along the way. But it popped the first time we tried to use it. So I started walking massive distances just up the beach. So I'm glad that I had people I like to talk to do that. This skull on the back of Nika's backpack there was a very, very old polar bear skull that I found buried in the sand. This area, we found a lot of artifacts like kind of spearheads and really super old bones and hunting tools and stuff like that. And things like that we kind of just left on the beach where we found them. But this really old skull we ended up bringing back to Fairbanks, and it's now somewhere maybe in the closets in the back of the Museum of the North at University of Alaska Fairbanks. So the island really only ever gets skinnier from that first picture I showed. You're just walking in between this lagoon and the ocean. I found it pretty amazing to like look out there every time I brush my teeth and know that I only went north and there's nothing else there. It's pretty crazy. Here's this old bear track and a photo that Peter Mather got of this bear that visited us running along the beach. We'd find fresh tracks going west one day and then fresh tracks going east the next day past our sleep tents, but this mother bear wasn't too interested. Maybe female bear. She didn't bother us too much. We just kind of coexisted. Here's a walrus surfacing on its way to haul out. It's about to get some good mollusks or something over at Icy Cape. This is a neighboring island with all sorts of spotted seal, probably 3,000 or so hauled out there. So you can kind of tell this is the ocean side with the big drop off there in the corner, and then the lagoon side where it's really warm and shallow and some good nursery area for those species as well. And the eiders. So these are the nests we were looking for. They're so cute and fuzzy. This is a successful nest. If we see the ducklings in the nest at the end or find the membranes and the eggshells, we can deem it a success. And so the point of the nest monitoring is to count the nests within the study region and then monitor them throughout. We're kind of babysitting them, going and checking on them, seeing when they hatch, and if they did hatch, or if they were predated, or if they got flooded by the ocean or trampled by a caribou, and kind of just report back to our bosses about that.
Anna,
Yeah.
what's the scale?
Oh, they're probably the size of a tennis ball at that age. Yeah. So eider are known for their down. They have really warm down, and I have a lot of memories of searching for nests. And when you first find a nest, you have to flush the female. It's kind of sad, but you need to be able to measure the eggs and float the eggs to determine when they'll hatch, and get some extra measurements for the data collection. And sometimes we'd run up there when the mother had left, and we'd just stuff our fingers into the down because it was so warm and our hands were so cold. And so these babies are looking kind of cozy in there. Here's what it looks like, the mother on their nest. I kind of started this bird nest searching on the easier side, at least in my experience. It's pretty easy to spot these moms from a ways away. And so we'd walk up this really skinny island, say, there's a duck, mark them, take a GPS point, count the eggs, float the eggs, and then come back to check on them later in the season. Here's a different photo of these females subtly laying on their nests. This either could be two females nesting really close to each other, or potentially a female just hanging out with the nesting mom. We call them aunts. A lot of times the females will just hang out together. I don't know what they do, keep each other company. I'm sure there's some papers on it I could read too. But a lot of times after the nests hatch, they'll kind of combine families because the male they've all left like weeks prior to this. And so the girls kind of hang out together, and you'll just see like 4 female eider and maybe 40 ducklings walking around behind them or swimming around behind them. This looks like early in the season, before the male fly away, they kind of protect their nest for a little while. Before the vegetation has gotten too high and too late in the summer, there's a higher chance that the nest could be predated. And so the male hang out in case they need to find somebody else to lay another nest or do that sort of thing. So sometimes you'll see the male here by the female, and it looks like there's a little tern nesting right behind this eider. So here's some of the nest checking. A lot of times a female will leave a trail as they fly away from the nest. We really freak them out when they flush off of there. Yeah. This is floating an egg. So this is to determine the age of the egg, when it was laid, so that we can then calculate the date that it will hatch based on when we found the nest, so that we can go check on it pretty close, or as close as possible to the estimated hatch date, so that evidence of a failure or a success of a hatch isn't lost due to weather or a bear coming through and sniffing it, even though there's no eggs left, stuff like that. So this is a hatching eider egg. We would candle these eggs, as we don't really do this with the shorebirds. We do float the shorebird eggs, but it's easy when these eggs are so big. This egg is obviously pipping, so it's ready to come out. And that air bubble in there has grown as big as it's gonna get. It's down here at day 28, so it's fully incubated. And this is how we also tell how old the shorebird eggs are as well. That air bubble will grow throughout the incubation period, and an egg sitting at the bottom of a water vessel, kind of laying horizontal, is a really fresh egg, maybe laid that day. And as it starts to float up and then reach the surface and float above the surface, you can use the angle and those measurements to figure out how many days old this egg is, or how long the mother has been sitting on the egg. Yeah, here's a couple more nest pictures. A pipping nest. This is kind of a dramatic photo that Peter took of us. This is a predated eider egg, or two of them, I should say, and it's an avian predator. So something we also try to note if we can is how the nest died, if it did fail. And so you can tell it's avian because they just stab it right in the middle with their beak. They don't have anything else to use, slurp out the insides. And obviously these eggs aren't in the nest anymore. So if this a duckling did not crawl out of that hole. It's not how ducks hatch, or shorebirds for that matter either. On a successful nest, we're looking for a nice pipped circle around the top of the egg where it'll kind of just break open, and then the membrane will start to detach from the eggshell as well. I'm also curious, I was going to ask earlier, has anyone ever been to Alaska or to the Arctic, at least like up north of the Arctic Circle in this room? Yeah, Denny? Sid? Wow, cool. This is an interesting nest. Kind of sad. I should have said earlier, a bit of a gore warning. There's some bones, some caribou parts, some eggs in this presentation. But sometimes you don't find out what happens. I don't really remember the outcome of this nest, but the contents to me look kind of funny. It's not as clean as just a straightforward success waterfowl hatch. Obviously this dead male eider right there kind of looks like that nest is providing some nutrients to the tundra plants around it, which is a nice thing to think about, but we do as much searching as we can, and sometimes you can't figure out what happened to the nest. There's not enough evidence, or there's conflicting evidence, and that's also good data. You just got to mark that down. So here's us getting a resupply of some food, probably the pizza and a new boat, very important. And then the caribou always there, lingering in the background. I'll say the next picture I do know is a little bit gory. We met these hunters named Willie and Joe from Wainwright. They're both very kind. They found us like 14 miles past our camp, and they said, "Which way did the caribou go?" And we said, "That way." And so they said, "Thank you." And they boated away. And then they came back probably 8 hours later and said, "We got some caribou. Thank you so much for telling us where they went. You should have this entire leg and shoulder of the caribou." And so I was a vegetarian at the time, and this was the first meat. I was like, I think this is good for me. Like, this probably ran past my tent this morning. It seems pretty sustainably grown. I'm not going to say no to this subsistence food. And I remember us wondering what to do because we did not have a fridge. We buried it in a bucket in the sand, which was as much as we could do to keep it cold. But we told them we didn't want all that meat, or we couldn't eat all of it. And so they cut it in half and then put it in 2 different bags and gave us both of the bags of caribou. So I went from eating no meat at all to caribou for breakfast and lunch and dinner for I don't know how many days. There's Willie and Joe. They also a couple times gave us, while our boat was not working, they gave us a ride back to our camp after a really long day walking all the way out there. And we ended up leaving some fuel canisters and some camp stuff for them out there. And my coworker who just went back to this area last summer also met them there. And she reported back to me that they said hello, and yeah, they remembered us. It's pretty sweet. This is just an example of some of the crazy stuff on the beach on the Arctic Ocean. That's a giant whale rib right there. And I have a lot of kind of crazy Arctic tundra stories, but I'm really glad that I avoided I fell into a whale carcass buried in the beach story. We walked right over the top of this before we realized there's some ribs poking out, so you can tell there's, yeah, a whale washed up. I'm not sure what kind, fully buried there in the sand. Definitely not something you want to stomp into. It's just kind of I like this picture a lot. This is the walk that I did out to the lagoon every day. Is where I did my laundry. And the view from our cook tent. Spent a lot of time there. That's me trying to pump up the boat. Yeah, and the mist there is really nice. This is the infamous July 4th, 2019 storm where the lagoon started overflowing and washing over the island that we were on. So this day we ended up digging a moat around our cook tent and staying up pretty late. We put these sticks out so we could mark from a distance or see how far the water was coming towards us. Just some of the things you have to deal with when you're living out there in the tundra, kind of with limited supplies for a long period of time. Eventually our cook tent door zipper stopped working. So we just stopped opening it. We just dug a hole underneath and we would just crawl through the hole every morning to get through the door. Here's Kayla and I on a lunch break. It's a pretty nice spot, I would say. Probably eating caribou. Yeah, so that was my first season that I did. Yes, right.
Are you gonna tell us what, like, who is using the data that you collected?
Yeah, so the first 3 seasons I said earlier were for Wildlife Conservation Society, which has a lot of offices and areas of conservation around the world, but I was working for the Arctic Beringia office. And there is a lot of data. I did not crunch any of those numbers, so I'm just going to talk about my experience in the fieldwork and what data I collected, but I definitely have sources for papers that my bosses have written. If you're interested in looking at those at all, just come talk to me afterwards. Yeah, so my last season was the only one that was not for WCS, and that was for ABR, also based out of Fairbanks. So 2020 happened and I did not go into the field, but I was lucky enough to return in 2021 to do another remote season. And this time we were establishing a long-term nest monitoring project. That's a mouthful. So we were some of the first people to go out to this area, and I set up the plots that will hopefully be up for 20 years, 30 years, and people will continue to monitor. So this is in an area called Kupaluk Special Area. It's about 11 kilometers northeast of Teshekapuk Lake, which is one of the largest freshwater lakes in Alaska. We used one of our off days or our rest days to hike there through shin-deep sphagnum moss. And then I wanted to go swimming, but it was fully iced in when we got there. And then it hailed, but it was still a good day. Yeah, so this little red dot is Kupaluk. Yeah, so a reminder, the first summer I spent right there and I just bopped over a little bit, really close to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. It's a pretty sweet area. So this time, instead of flying, I drove up the Dalton Highway from Fairbanks, which ends in a town called Dead Horse or Prudhoe Bay. And we camped in the foothills of the Brooks Range. This is at Galbraith Lake. And I did want to say I'm going to show a lot of drawings and art that I did while I was in the field or in the time afterwards. It's kind of one of the only things I return back to ever draw. I'm kind of hyper-focused on eggs, actually, just eggs. But here is our camp. I have a big field journal of some of my time throughout a few seasons. So camping the night before, setting out into the field in the Brooks Range, and then going up the Dalton Highway is cool. If you go to Alaska and you want a bird, I would just start in Fairbanks and drive north, because you'll see a lot of crazy stuff. But I saw a deer falcon while I was driving up the Dalton Highway. This is a herd of muskox. We've got grizzly bear, 3 cubs, kind of just off the side of the road. Super wild. Now I've got some brand new thigh-high rubber boots, which I didn't have the first time, but I have had ever since then to work in the tundra doing shorebird work. So we took a helicopter out there and it was looking cold and not as beachy or sandy. I was feeling a little weird in the helicopter this time, but you kind of can't go back once you've already gotten into the helicopter. You gotta sit out the 50 days. Yeah, so one thing I love about the tundra is just like the crazy geometry of it. The freeze and thaw cycle creates these wild polygons. It's very geometric. Sometimes those lines are like perfectly at 90 degrees from each other. It's pretty wild to see from up in the air, but it also is repeated down to a really small scale. So this is what I look like that year. Cut all my hair off because I took probably 4 real baths that summer. And yeah, did a couple of prints after that season, just like eggs and feathers and little polygon looking shapes, and that's all I could do. So my mind is just really focused there, and yeah, super inspired by it. The things that I saw, and just living life there for 50 days at a time. At this point, this is 400 days of my life I spent out in Alaska in the tundra doing bird work, and I tried to estimate last night how many hours. I think it's close to 4,000 hours, which is maybe why I didn't feel the need to script this out. It's like the one thing I really could just go off forever about. So setting up camp, it's a little snowy still. There's probably not too many nesters out there. This time we got a weather port, so I didn't have to crawl under the door of my tent to get in to cook breakfast anymore. Here's a little camp sketch. This looks like late in the season. And then this is some more middle of the night Arctic light, just full rainbows. Yeah, if you're looking for big skies, this is really where you have to go. You can see for so far. We actually ended up changing our work schedule because it ended up just being always freezing fog or hail at 8, 9 in the morning. So I started going to bed at 3, waking up at 11, and we'd work during those hours. So I was usually out there doing monitoring like 11 or 12 p.m. or a.m. And then coming back for dinner at like 1 in the morning and then going to bed. But it's really beautiful in the middle of the night, very quiet and still in the Arctic. This is the inside of our weather port. I don't know what I'm talking about there, reading in my field journal. Got a pretty good setup. And here's a view from camp. Again, just caribou all over the place. So I mentioned the larger freshwater lake, Teshekpuk Lake. There's a herd of caribou named after Teshekpuk Lake, or named for, or maybe they're named for each other. But it's called the Teshekpuk herd, and I was lucky to see them come through this area. So this is a little bit south of camp. You can kind of see it way on the horizon over there, and they were just stomping through. So this area was definitely where trampling as a type of failure for a nest was pretty highly likely. So there I am kind of with the stakes that we use to mark out the nests or the plot. There's my coworker Wyatt kind of standing in the middle there, doing his thing, and they're doing their thing, and yeah, not super bothered. I found it pretty amazing that I think a lot of these animals that I looked at right in their eyes had probably never seen a human before, like just staring down Arctic fox and just wonder what they're thinking. They've just never seen something like you. So it feels pretty lucky. Yeah, I think I probably just woke up, crawled out of my tent. There they are, hanging out.
Electrified fences?
Yeah, the bear fences are electrified. We learned to rig up a door after we had like crawled over one too many times and touched the grounding wire to the other wires, and you just get like a full body zap. But the idea is if a bear comes up with its big body that can't get through the wires, or its wet nose touches it, then it'll be a little wary of going any further. Yeah, so this is early season. We got all of our water from these really shallow, kind of grody lakes. Kind of went out there, hacked away at the ice, poured it in there with a cup, filtered it. And then here we have a lot of survey lath, is what we use to set up our plots, where they're spray painting it. Believe it or not, neon orange actually really blends in with tundra colors. You really got to get neon pink or blue, because there end up being a ton of really bright, warm colors up there. Here's my calendar for that season. So nest searching and nest checking is what we did all season long. It is on a special schedule. So we would start out with nest searching and plot reestablishment or plot setup. A lot of times when you get out there, you need to fix up the stakes and do a little bit of tidying before you can get to the fun stuff and the bird watching. So you're always rushing through that to try to get it set up and looking good. In this case, we did a lot of plot setup because we established these plots. And these were square plots, which were different than my future seasons. We would do the nest monitoring in addition to things like snow surveys. So just taking a survey of the coverage of snow over the span of the season, predator point counts, bee trap or invertebrate surveys, and a lot of like little side missions too. So this summer we had a coworker who was doing sabine gull research. Apparently nobody knows where the juvenile go. So he's putting little backpack tags on them as we were roaming around. And then we were doing another little side project for a guy who was doing research on shrinking shorebird egg size due to climate change, or if that's happening or not. So we were just measuring all of our eggs that we found for him. That's kind of the fun part about long-term projects is that you can just take as much data as you want, hand it off to your PI, and maybe they'll use everything you used, or maybe a grad student in 15 years will use some of the data you used. You just kind of don't really know what they're going to combine and get some information on. So we would do rope drag and W walks kind of every other week, and then move into nest checking. So the meat of the season, the first 3 or 4 weeks was just searching like all over the place for these nests. And then once we're pretty sure everybody's gotten down and laid everything, we'll go out and just check them and not really search for them anymore. These are all my supplies that I keep on me. Jolly Rancher is very important. Bear slug, my cap, my binoculars, of course, data sheets and a rangefinder and an egg float cup, my calipers. Yeah, just again, more really flat ground. Doesn't look like a whole lot from this perspective or this distance. These tussocks, I had a coworker once describe them as the old or the redwoods of the tundra, or the redwoods or the old growth trees of Alaska, because some of these little tussocks, the vegetation within them has been growing for 100 to 300 years. It's a really slow growing season in the tundra. Yeah. So our plots were set up with these survey lath, like I said, and this is my coworker Peter's view of us setting up our lines. We would just mark out a grid with pieces of wood and do some strategic searching within those grids. So I'm there getting Peter with the rangefinder, making sure he's 50 meters away, and then marking down our stakes. So that line goes very far back. My plots that I searched in the oil fields were 1 kilometer long. These ones were grids, like a box of 400 by 400 meters. So a lot of space to search for tiny, tiny birds. So one of the things we would do is rope drag, which is exactly as it sounds. You walk with a 50-meter rope over with your partner to the next stake, and you kind of do this. And you just want to flush the birds up and freak them out. Or dowitchers are really hard to get. You kind of have to whack them on the back of the head for them to flush off of their nest. But that's one way you search for shorebirds, or to scare them off. And so we would rope drag all of our plots at a certain line until we were done. It might take 2 or 3 days to rope drag. Then we would do something called W walking, then rope drag again, then W walk again, until it was time for us to just keep checking on the eggs. So those tussocks often were really hard to get around. You had to do some pretty funky wrist stuff to get that rope over the tussocks. Oftentimes, like this picture, dragging through ponds. It's really heavy, actually. So this is my little crude drawing of the plots that we had at Koopalook. a grid. This is the W walk. It's just a way to walk so that your body covers a certain amount of ground that a certain range around you, the birds nearby will be freaked out. So you just W walk. W walk days, you walk a lot. So that's 50 meters across, 50 meters back, 50 meters across, all the way up, sometimes for a kilometer, and then back down the other side in every single square for another kilometer. And then rope drag, you kind of just wander up each side. And then once you get to the end, you turn around and you wander down until you've covered all of the ground. Things that will happen when you're nest searching is that a bird flushes off of a nest, maybe flies away, stays close, acts like it has a broken wing, kind of those general things that are a little suspicious of a female bird. A lot of times with the shorebirds, you're looking for a male bird, say if it's a phalarope. I don't care about the females at all. They don't sit on the nest, so I don't look at them. And then the pectoral sandpipers, the males don't sit at all. So I only look for the females. And then with the other species, sometimes it's a little hard to differentiate, or they'll both hang out with the nest, like the plovers and the semi-palmated sandpipers. So those hip boots coming in handy. I've definitely flooded my britches a few times walking through those lakes. So shorebirds have really beautiful nests. They keep them really tidy. They generally just have 4 eggs and they're all small side pointed in. One way you can determine if a nest has been abandoned or not by the parents, say maybe if a human is messing with it a little too much and they wanted to get out of there, you turn one egg pointy side out. And then if you come back and it's turned back in, you know somebody's coming back to check on it. And so then this is us egg floating, checking that angle and then getting the measurement so we can tell how old the eggs are and come back hopefully on its hatch date. These are some Sabine's gull egg. And I have some nest pictures. This is probably taken at hip height. But one thing that I love that the tundra has done to me is made me really just notice tiny little movements and tiny little details. There's subtle differences in color. It's truly trained my eyeballs, which is pretty crazy and changes the way that I see everything, basically, and everything in nature. This is a pretty easy one. We see the nest. You guys see the nest? It's right there. 4 eggs. Get a little harder, but also centered in the photo a little bit. Sometimes you'll walk up, you've seen the bird wander back to the nest in your binoculars and kind of go head down, butt up, and then settle in the little indent. And you walk over and you're looking right where the nest was and it's just not there. 2 minutes, 3 minutes, nothing's there. And then suddenly it's there. You have no idea how it happens. They're so well camouflaged. Okay, we're getting harder. Does anybody see a nest in there? Maybe. It's right here. There's an egg. Kind of tough. There it is up there, little lighter eggs. It depends on what the grasses and the mosses look like around it too. This one's tough. Oh, I almost couldn't find it for a second. It's right here. There's the 4-leaf clover there, the eggs. And this one's expert level. You can't see it from above. They got a little side door. So you have to kind of like get down in there and look around for a while. They get really camouflaged. Yeah, I think these are some phalarope eggs. They all kind of have the same shape and like mottled look about them, but some are a little greener, some are a little browner. And you kind of get to know that. We've got probably a black-bellied plover nest. They kind of like the drier, more lichen-y land. And then this is a dad being really protective. It was interesting. This is like kind of a mating display, but I think he was doing it at us to intimidate us. I was confused by this behavior. This is a Lapland longspur nest. So we actually monitor anything that nests within the nesting area. So that oftentimes will involve greater white-fronted geese, or Lapland longspur, Savannah sparrow, some passerines, some waterfowl, some shorebirds. Gets pretty fun. Looks like something happened to this. From my memory, I think potentially this was a trampling. A caribou got just the edge of that, or it could be a lemming that's crawled in there. And chewed away at a few, but I love lalo eggs so much. They remind me of like raku fired ceramics with the horsehair burned on the outside, and they all look super different. There's some Lapland longspurs. So these guys, we won't assume that they've successfully or had a successful nest until they fledge. The passerines are altricial, so they'll stay for 10 days after they hatch, and they have to be able to fledge the nest, or there has to be evidence of that for us to deem it a success. And then the shorebirds, if we see them in the nest, that's pretty lucky because they'll leave within a day of hatching. These are some pretty young Lapland longspur, so they got a ways to go in that nest. And then when they start looking like Danny DeVito, they got a little bit of down, some pin feathers. They like start looking really pissed off at you when you get up to their nest. They're getting a little older. And also, if they think you're their mom and they ask for food right when you get up there, they're also pretty young, so their eyes shut. There's a western sandpiper. I think this nest got eaten by a bear, which is sad. It was the only one I've ever seen. Only 3 eggs, which is also interesting. Oh, here's the Sabian skull egg. It's hard to tell without that context of sides. Here's me being pretty giddy, finding that Sabian's nest. Sabian is really mad, acting kind of like a tern, actually, screeching and pooping everywhere. Yeah, and then I just have so many pictures that look just like this. This could be a Dunlin, maybe a pectoral sandpiper. Again, it's really hard to tell without taking those caliper measurements and noting the difference in millimeters, or at least seeing the adult. Here's one of my first drawings, kind of hyper-focused on the eggs and feathers here for a while. Some found objects in the tundra. There's butterflies everywhere, bones. Glaucous gull is a big predator, as well as Jaegers. So they're Pomeranian, parasitic, and long-tailed Jaegers. Snowy owl, there are harrier, there are short-eared owl, golden eagle, bear, all sorts of stuff, lemmings, anything of any size will eat these eggs. They gotta stay really hidden. I love the willow plants up there. It's kind of amazing to visit the tundra because I feel like I get there in winter, I experience spring in a week, I experience summer in 2 weeks, and then fall starts happening. And the leaves all change, the colors change so quickly, it's pretty crazy. A greater white-fronted goose feather and a grouse feather, some more eggs. Here's a, hard to tell. Sandpiper maybe, or a Dunlin. Looking like a little moss ball. Its brother there, or sister, is like pretty fresh out of that egg. And 2 are yet to come. So I would see this nest marked on the date, and I would call that a success if I saw those shorebirds alive within the nest within 5 days of the hatch date. Here's some pretty young, freshly hatched shorebirds. And these shorebirds are really neat. They keep their eggs really tidy, and they'll also throw out all of the eggshells once their babies have hatched. So if I don't get to the nest during the time that the eggs are hatching or the babies are there, there's probably not going to be any eggs for me to investigate or look for any evidence of a success or a failure. And so you can look around and find these egg bottoms. So they got their nice little pip holes that they pop the top off and they crawled out or slid out or however. More moss balls. They're so cute and they're so tiny. These are like less than a golf ball size. Really, really small. I think you saw those eggs in my fingers. The chick has to come out of that, so her body's pretty tiny. There's an avian predation poking that hole in the side. I wonder if this could be a goose egg. That one looks really big to me. This is an example of a trampling. I think a caribou came by. This one was almost ready to go. Sorry, it's a sad one, but got stomped, which happens in nature. And these are an example of some of the data we take down about the different habitat types. Yeah, just marking everything about the birds, about the area around, the other species in the range. Got a ruddy turnstone, and tundra swan. Huge, cool eggs. And this is a fox den that happened to randomly be in one corner of our plots that we set up. And they actually have their own habitat distinction within tundra habitat because they bring so much carrion and things that fertilize the soil around that there's a whole class of flowers that will exist on fox den. So here's like this lush grass on top of the fox den, fertilized by goose bits and eggs. Oh, yay. We put a game camera on the fox den. She had 7 puppies. This is her in the summertime. This is the Arctic fox. Tiny little blue-eyed babies. I went through 10,000, maybe 9,000 photos of this fox den, and I deleted. It was such a mental battle. I deleted so many, but I kept 100 that I could not part with. Here's a really smart goose family walking right over some gosling down there. Oh, there, this little guy's got a gosling. I was honestly rooting for them. I'm rooting for the birds, but I was rooting for her too. Even better, oh, I thought that was a goose last night. Look, I thought it was a goose. It's a baby fox. That's crazy. Really curious. Super curious. Yeah. I'll go fast here through the rest of these pictures, but the next 2 seasons are also shorebird monitoring. We got a resupply halfway through, which was really great because some miscommunication with one of my coworkers. We did not have enough food for the first 25 days. So there's a lot of talk about snow geese today. One of my coworkers was an Alaska resident with a hunting license, had some bird shot with him, and we were rationing. And we were also not near any snow geese nesting ground, kind of just in their flyway. So I ate a lot of snow goose that season, kind of by necessity. Yeah, their population's booming these days. So 19 days straight of goose, maybe you made a dent in it, but these are the blue moor. This is us having some snow geese. This is a camping meal. I'm not gonna linger here for very long. My buzz cut. I got a bunch of clay from the Arctic, which is pretty crazy, that I also brought down back to Minnesota, where I'm from, where I went to college, and I fired it. Obsessed with the eggs and the shapes. I just couldn't stop. It was like muscle memory, just like making eggs with my eyes closed. Yeah, and so the Arctic, that can look like this when you arrive. It just like is so full of life and so full of color. These are tiny little willow plants and mushrooms, and more of that pattern on a small scale. Crazy light from the sun. Those rings around. I don't think I put any flower repeats in here. They're cranberry. Yeah, just super colorful. This is Labrador tea. Poppies. Those are the blooming cranberry. This cartoon looking flowers. This is Teshekpuk Lake. I wanted to swim in that. We drank a little bit. Headed back. Cotton grass. Yeah, some of those freeze-thaw lines between the polygons of the tundra. This is another storm, gigantic thunderstorm, also on the 4th of July, in the tundra. We really hunkered down for this one, but we got our resupply that day, so it was a good day. And here's us packing into the float plane, flying back through the Brooks Range back to Fairbanks to deliver all of our data. These next 2 seasons were, this one is at Prudhoe Bay, also with WCS. I was crewlead on this project. So headed up to Oil Spill Hill within Prudhoe Bay. This area has the footprint of Anchorage. And we had many more plots, and the study was not a square. It was a very long plot instead of a square. It's a kilometer long in these pairs. And yeah, with humans come different predators. Got red fox moving up, still with the Arctic fox sitting right on the pipeline. Still beautiful. Peregrine falcon are way up there, which is kind of crazy, but they can nest high up in the infrastructure. Snowy owl, lemming, American golden plover, buff-breasted sandpiper. We saw them in their lek, which was really cool. Monitor their nests. King eider, spectacled eider, dowitcher, Pacific loon, stilt sandpiper, little semi-palmated, pectoral, parasitic jaeger, Lapland longspur, red-necked phalarope. Yeah, so just wherever people go, animals are always there first. This is outside of my dorm window, and they're just a mom and baby caribou basking in the shade. Took this picture while we were doing field work. Kind of crazy to see these like towers of fire and this whole herd of caribou munching there, but you know, it's important to be out there doing that work. Sometimes you have to be in these areas as well. Yeah, so same deal, W walking, rope dragging, just kind of in a different shape. Still snowy in the early season, really cold. But also super beautiful. Some of our plots were pretty far away from some of that infrastructure. Got to be shorts weather sometimes, fields of cotton grass. Same deal, floating eggs. Pretty sky picture, another nest right up in there. And some more examples of that egg diversity. This is a plover egg versus a Lapland longspur egg. Here's this Lapland longspur nest right there. And a big obvious goose nest. This is a weird nest. This is a phalarope that had something was up with her. She wasn't eating right or something, but it succeeded. Even though you can see the yolk through that shell, it was really scary to float that one. Some really, really fresh greater white-fronted geese. Danny DeVito, angry passerines. This nest actually succeeded. 2 were predated over time, 1 hatched. And as long as you have 1 that makes it out, it's deemed a success in the data at least. And here's just some of the crazy colors that can happen in the tundra. Just like super deep reds. There's like blues up there, neon green, new flowers. This is a mid-July snowman. I think we named him Pingo, which is a classification for some of the tundra habitat. More mushrooms and pollinators, of course. Yeah, summer was really beautiful. Really happy to have a short stay so you can pull down those horrible boots. You know, there's mosquitoes everywhere. There were lots. I'm trying not to remember that. This is last summer. I was doing consulting is different than the nonprofit with WCS. I was in a different oil field nearby called Alpine. These are the helicopters we took to our plots every day. So I'd still walked a lot, but I didn't have to walk quite as far. We named them the Stallion and the Pumpkin. We would take one of them every day. I got some really nice views every day, really high up of that pattern that I love. Really cool puzzle looking land. Sky. Got some new species of godwit. Willow ptarmigan. This is my Savannah sparrow nest. I've only ever found one. And I went waist deep in some water for it. Yeah, one day I was looking down, I saw this little reflection. Then I looked up and this is crazy. It was 3D, all of these arcs around the sun. There's a mosquito in there, at least 2, 3. Some violets. Yeah, I submitted this to the Alaska Shorebird Foundation photo contest and I won. So I just got a painting of a pectoral sandpiper in the mail from an Anchorage artist. Super sweet. Yeah, so I started in Casa Gaelic, popped over there, a little further, a little back. And that was 4 years of nest monitoring. Sorry, I could go on forever. I have so many pictures, but if you want to talk to me afterwards about anything else or have any questions now, or if you want to hire me to do field work, I'm looking for a job, you can do that too. So thank you for listening and I'm so happy to be here.
The birds that, I think the shorebirds that have is that for synchronous net hatching? So they can match their heartbeats together.
I honestly don't quite know what that's for. As far as I know, as someone who does the nest searching, it's just, I only know about it as a behavior. So I know turn the egg out, if you want them in. I don't quite know. That's a really good question. It might be for distribution of temperature with the mother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Killdeers, that always have the eggs touching, so they got to get up and go.
Oh, yeah.
They don't have
Yeah.
a twist. So someone wants to make the air. So that's the time, so that's the heartbeats.
On your second summer, you showed the pictures of the polygon. It seems like there was water everywhere.
Yeah, it's super wet.
And I wondered, when you lay out your plots, isn't there a lot of water there that you have to walk through?
There is, the plots are really long too, and those polygons are kind of raised up. Some are high centered polygons versus low centered polygons. There's a whole slew of vegetation classifications for them. If they're riparian near a river, but they only need like a tiny little pie shaped dry spot to put their nest. And some shorebirds like it more wet and some like it more dry. So the phalarope you're gonna find like on the rims of ponds versus those plover are gonna be on the top of a high centered polygon, kind of in the lichen, in the dry area. Yeah, thank you.